Om. The bliss of the Guru is the bliss of Samadhi. The bliss of the Guru is the bliss of Atman. The bliss of the Guru is the bliss of Parabrahman. The idea of Samadhi, the bringing together of the highest intuitive truth in one place. It is the spiritual event of realization. The Guru is the same as or one with this event. The bliss of the Guru is the bliss of Atman. Atman is the consciousness of the self. The Guru is one and the same as the self. One is the same as consciousness. The bliss of the Guru is the bliss of Parabrahman. Parabrahman is the supreme consciousness, is that. Is the God consciousness, the totality. The Guru is the one and the same as that. This is pure mysticism. Mysticism is that quality of experience that goes past reason, goes past meaning, and is experienced directly by consciousness as consciousness. These lines from the Gita speak of the direct nature of the Guru, that the principle of the Guru, which is more than a person or a place arising at a given time, but an eternal spirit that arose as an aspect of the creation at the moment of creation. As the creation arises, it arises in layers of spiritual law. The principle of the Guru is present at the beginning, present at the middle, and present at the end of the creation. It is an aspect of the triunity of creation, salvation, and the eternal presence of the truth. The idea of the Guru is dynamic. It is the expression of mercy, salvation, deliverance from the wheel of the law. It's a safety valve within the system of consciousness. The word Guru, by its very matrika, expresses the subject-object split of the nature of consciousness. The division between the ocean of consciousness and the creation. The pathway of the Bhairava from the ocean of consciousness to the throb of creation, the spanda, into wherein the unity begins its movement into infinite diversity. At the level of mantra, the appearance of the shattering of the one, the level of vibration into infinite diversity, and the oscillation of vibration into formation, mudra. Produces this idea of a closed circuit. The ocean of consciousness arising to the Om point. At the Om point, a division occurs, and the ocean of consciousness begins the process of becoming the creation. This is primal mysticism, a primal idea. In the beginning there was the word. In the beginning there was the sound. Sound is the mantra, the vibration. What was before the beginning? The everything of consciousness. The idea of consciousness moving into the throb of creation, the diversity of vibration, and the envelope of the manifest physical creation. And this idea, what we call the Om point, takes place at the level of spanda. That idea of the one becoming the many. And right at this point, we see the complete layout of the word guru. The syllable gu represents the manifest of the diversity, the creation. The syllable ru manifests, expresses the infinite light of consciousness. As the two syllables are bound into a single word, we see that concept of division inside a wider concept of unity. The idea of the creation is thought of as the unconscious, that which is not aware of its own nature. It is manifest. The idea of the ocean of consciousness is supremely conscious. The syllable gu represents the unconscious manifestation of the creation. The syllable ru, the infinite light, the unified light of supreme consciousness. It's important to pay attention to this in that it shows that the guru concept arises at the beginning. It is not something way down the chain. Thus we say, the bliss of the Guru is the bliss of Parabrahman, the supreme and unified consciousness. The bliss of the Guru is the bliss of Atman, the bliss of consciousness of the self. This idea of self is actually one of the more recent manifestations in terms to imply the interconnection between an individual in expression, a perceiver, separate perceiver, or it could be in the great sense of Atman, or the great sense of the infinite creation, the Para-Atman. That the Guru is one with this Para-Brahman. It is that the Guru is one with the Atman, self. It is that. It is not something that leads to that. It is that itself. The bliss of the Guru is the bliss of samadhi. The samadhi is the transformational state of consciousness wherein one being, a being who is bound in separation, realizes its unified nature and draws all together in one place the idea of samadhi. All together in one place the recognition of the highest intuitive truth. The Guru is that. Guru, consciousness and unconsciousness. Two syllables bound together in a single idea. And this idea is incredible. The idea of consciousness being the true sphere. And then this idea of consciousness dividing itself from itself, expressing itself unconsciously. This has always been the question: what happened? How did it happen? Why did it happen? Meher Baba says it was the arising of a whim. I've always found that a spectacular thing to say. Because what is a whim? It's something arose out of nowhere. Whims don't have a reason. They don't have a purpose. If it had an intent, it wouldn't be a whim. It would be an intention. I think that's as close as it gets to an explanation we're ever going to get. But what's incredible about this idea is that once the whim of separation occurs, the whim of creation, it strikes through the Om point and begins its process of diversity, of infinite diversity, through sound and form. Once we come out of the infinite unity of consciousness into unconsciousness, this is where the beginning of the wheel occurs. We are subject to the laws of creation. Which is to say, once the creation of unconsciousness happens, there's not an immediate correlation back to consciousness. It's not like, of course, consciousness pervades the unconscious. But as we were talking about yesterday, where the layers of spiritual law that are the underlying architecture of the creation, the primal law being cause and effect, the sheer brutality of the wheel, and the mitigating factors of impressionistic forms of consciousness. In other words, the impressions begin to move upwards. We have impressions of the physical body. The physical body is subject to cause and effect. It is solid. And thus, it must deal with the wheel. It cannot exist without karma. As soon as the karma is exhausted, the body falls. It just comes apart. But we can mitigate the law of cause and effect. In other words, we can take the body and we deal with the intensity of the law of the wheel. But by intelligence, we come to understand that there is a higher and mitigating layer of spiritual laws that overshadows the raw force of cause and effect. And we can begin to generate impressions that are positive to our existence, positive in their impact in that they uplift us out of just the raw equation of the wheel. We can begin to generate actions out of the sphere of love, out of the sphere of generosity, kindness, friendship, steadfastness, which forms a set of impressions. As we feel them in our system, they are light and uplifting. They lift us above the jungle. When you are traveling in the world, there's a kind of feeling. You're traveling through forest, through jungle. Then you come to a city. There's a kind of aurora there. The spiritual laws of higher impressions have organized themselves above the jungle. You have the direct experience of something higher. And it feels great to walk out of the jungle and check into a 5-star hotel. It is a higher set of laws, the laws of impressions. By organizing one's impressions, one can mitigate the brutality of sheer cause and effect. Conversely, this idea, if one lives by one's appetites, forming dark behaviors, one's impressions are dark, heavy, and will bring you back into the force of the wheel again and again. This highest set of laws, of course, are Shaktipat, spiritual fortune, spiritual grace. Contact with the Guru, which the Guru by their very nature is the incarnation of salvation, deliverance. It's not because somebody thought it up. It's just how the program is. But we see, once the unconscious occurs, it is subject to the laws of creation. There's no longer a one-to-one relationship between consciousness and unconsciousness. This is subtle and somewhat tricky because, of course, the appearance of the unconscious creation is that an appearance. It seems to be separate. And that this seeming to be separate energy is what we call Maya. It has great force and great momentum, and is propelled by these layers of spiritual laws. But because it is subject to these laws, this one-to-one relationship between conscious and unconsciousness is lost. It becomes a minus and separate. Which is to say, unconsciousness must run its cycle. It must plumb its own depths, creating, subject to the dynamics of cause and effect, creating layer after layer, world after world, system of impressions, finally coming into the contact with the agency of deliverance, the Guru, wherein Shaktipat occurs. As I said, the Guru's principle can be anything. The Guru can be in a person, it can be in a tree, it can be in a glass of water. It's however this eternal spirit chooses to manifest, such as it is. But you must learn to be able to recognize the Guru, to gain access to it. The Guru's grace comes as gift. It's not something that you earn. But foreknowledge is forewarned. If you understand your situation and begin to actively seek out the agency of grace, you can most certainly shorten its path. But this idea of the unconscious, we, because we are manifest, are a part of the unconscious. We all have our karma. Each to their own equations, subject to the laws of cause and effect. We also have our entire history of behavioral activity, which have set in place a system of impressions. And to those extent that we acted out of the higher nature, higher angels of our nature, out of love, out of generosity, out of kindness. We have generated good impressions, which accumulates good karma. And this way we can attract fortune, experience, opportunity, deepen our knowledge of life. And to the extent that we have generated systems of impressions of the darker nature, acting out of greed, out of hatred, anger, jealousy, we have set those impressions in place. And they accumulate. And that each of us has our own set of impressions that we must work out. And there's an exact corollary between this microcosmic idea and macrocosmic universal world system. From the standpoint of infinite world systems, the karma of one single planet, Prithvi, the planet Earth, is like a being. The karma of this world is the sum total of the beings that live upon it. The impressionistic layers of this world is the sum total of all the impressions of all the beings that live upon it. And we are one world system in a universe of world systems. And this is the creation. All of the world systems of any given universe, and there are universes of universes, it's simply a wider perception of this same concept. In this room there are 20 people and there are 20 karmas, forms of karma, with their sets of impressions stored, because it's the sum total of our experiences, the pressures we faced and how we faced them. Each situation is an opportunity to act towards the truth, which is always other than self, outward, expressive, or acted darkly, selfishly, to the exclusion of others. It's a general guideline. The golden rule applies in all world systems. So this idea of consciousness having manifest unconsciously, and we've gone through the chain of spiritual laws. There's this idea, you've oftentimes heard the phrase, the three worlds. Very poetic and has a kind of profound ring to it. And it's important to understand that the three worlds are the three spheres of being. The physical world, the envelope of physicality. The subtle physical world, the envelope of the electrical energy. And the causal world, the envelope of mental formation. The envelope of mental formation is infinitely vast. Within it, like the nut, like the meat inside a nut, is the envelope of the subtle physical. And the smallest part, the envelope of the physical world. And each of these world systems, the law of the wheel occurs. Cause and effect, the mitigating quality of impressions that is based on behavioral activity and intention. Because there's no immediate one-to-one relationship between good and evil. It's always the context of one's actions that carries the message of that was good, that was bad. And it is the intention of the action that carries the message. The emotional tone attenuated to the intention of the expression of one's will produces the impression. So that once one has a set of impressions stored, those impressions produce a conditioning factor. The stored emotions and emotional tone and intentions of past actions condition the emotional tone and conditions of present actions that give rise to the flavor of the emotional tone and conditions of possible future actions. They all arise simultaneously, but they appear to move in the chain of time. I want to use this idea of appearance again and again. This idea of appearance carries the message of emptiness. The ability to recognize the true emptiness of all things is one of the pathways of deliverance. When you come to the end of this life and the mind separates from the body and the great light dawns, you have a moment of choice. By understanding, you recognize the great light as the true nature of being. It has the light of a billion suns that does not burn. And you will make a selection. In an instant, you will go, yes. And in that moment, you will merge with that great light. But if in that same instant, you generate fear, I will be destroyed, then you activate the unconscious side and you make the selection of the bardo. And then you are driven down a corridor, which essentially each of the 100 fibers manifesting one at a time, first as the peaceful deities of heart, and then as the wrathful deities of mind. They are the deep structure of consciousness. As I said yesterday, one of the great revelations of dream yoga, it's an important revelation, is that the waking state is as much a dream as any dream you've ever had. It's the dream of the waking state. It always was. But it is in the waking state that you generate most of your impressions. Because you have the body, the senses, the mind, the life force. In other words, all in one place. And so the choices and selections you make in the waking state are where you start your cataloging and encyclopedia of mitigating impressions. Because this is so, spiritual training is always, whatever is spiritual training in any system, in any religion, eschew, anger, jealousy, lust, greed, give rise to kindness, friendship, generosity, love, patience. Patience, one of the greatest powers in the universe. It is with patience that you'll finally learn to understand. But each of the three worlds, the physical world, the subtle physical world, and the causal world, are connected to cause and effect and mitigated by impressions. So, you live 60, 70,000 incarnations as a human being, you go through 100,000 wars, 900,000 marriages, you raise 500,000 children. And you form your catalog of impressions. And there's always this kind of dividing line, the householder and the spiritual wanderer, the sadhu. And then at one point you go, hell with this. I only want to think about the self. I only want to think about the higher forms of consciousness. And you become a sadhu. You become a yogi. And you start a set of higher impressions, doing yoga, generating, and you go to your teacher and he says, don't act out of anger or lust or greed or selfishness. Generate love, generate generosity, generate kindness, generate patience. Think about the self, meditate, and you start a whole set of higher impressions, because those will generate higher impressions. And slowly but surely, the boiling pot that is your stew of karma and impressionistic existence begins to become lighter and lighter and lighter. And as that nature begins to change, your mind changes. As your mind changes, it begins to become still. As it begins to become more and more still, you begin to be able to see deeper into the nature of things. Understanding begins to arise. And true patience, forbearance, power, endurance, generosity, kindness, and love begin to dawn. These are all very profound subjects. Take lifetimes to master. I always loved Meher's slogan, mastery and servitude. It says everything. And the Gita, the true disciple is the servant of the Guru. The Gurus are all servants of God. but is this idea of unconsciousness dividing itself from consciousness. And even though consciousness, of course, there's never been a second reality, it is a form of appearance. This quality of Maya, the momentum of the momentum, the drive of unconsciousness, must be recognized. In other words, you can't just go back to one, oh, it's back, there is it. Because now we have karma in the three worlds. We have the karma of the physical body. We have the karma of the subtle physical body. We have the karma of the mental body. We have the mitigating impressions of the physical body. We have the mitigating impressions of the subtle physical body, and the mitigating impressions of the causal body. All very important because it's how we get there. What this is really characterized as is the plumbing the depths of your own nature. We've talked about this before on a personal level, this idea of this highest form of spiritual law, Shaktipat, grace, spiritual grace. The idea of grace is it's a force that even mitigates impressions. It mitigates high impressions, it mitigates medium impressions, and it mitigates base impressions. And it actually has the capacity through emptiness to break the thrall of the wheel. The agency of this is emptiness. It's a good thing, it's one thing. It's the one thing that clears you out. When you go through the bardo, which of course you're going through now, the bardo is divided, by the way, by two ideas. It's called the intermediate bardo and the bardo. Intermediate, meaning it comes and goes, is that small stretch of time where you actually have a body. That's the intermediate bardo, where you seem to be delivered from the bardo. Because why? Because you have this physical encasement. It slows everything down. Because in the bardo, the content of your karma, the content of your impressionistic catalog plays out instantaneously. There's no way to stop it. It happens so fast and so relentlessly. All you can do is experience it, and it's like being driven by high winds on a flat plain, nowhere to hide. The intermediate state are these little episodes where you've actually come out of the bardo, in all of our cases, entered the envelope of the physical world through the womb gate. The womb gate is how a human being enters this world. And then you're given a nice warm house to be in. And you're delivered from the relentless winds of the laws of cause and effect, of the laws of the wheel. And you're given the impression that you have free will, given the impression you have choice, and you do. Your choice is to act of the higher nature, of the lower nature, at every turn. What happens in every day, 20 times a day, you're presented with an opportunity to express your own higher nature or your own lower nature. There's no middle ground. You make a selection with your action. That becomes an impression, and that goes into the catalog. And this way they spool on and spool on and spool on. At the end of every intermediate condition, the mind and the body separate. Then you're given a choice. The great light presents itself. If you've trained yourself, the great light, oh, that's God, great. Boom, I'm out of here. But if you don't recognize the light of consciousness, you select the bardo. The one move is this idea of emptiness. And that's always the move. To recognize, see, consciousness is beyond quality. It's beyond the mind. Anything that you think of consciousness is an imputed term. This idea of emptiness is something that is infinitely empty. And you can fill it with everything. You can fill it with the ocean of universes and it'll still be empty. It'll never be full. It's this very profound idea. It also perhaps carries this idea of beyond or completely without quality. It's not empty like void, because the void is a quality. The void is just in front of emptiness. If you can say, oh, it's the void, well, and the void exists. It's the gateway to emptiness. It's a capacity of mind. But how do you recognize what you can't even conceive of? As we were talking about last night, it's a developmental thing, this idea of sadhana, this idea of spiritual development, which is, by the time you have become a human being, you have achieved a form complex enough to realize the truth. Which is to say, you have a very profoundly developed, subtle physical body. And that's actually the important thing. So much of what we call the fast path is the manipulation of the subtle physical body. They are essentially a set of circuits that pre-Shaktipat are not active, and post-Shaktipat are switched on systematically. As they switch on systematically, the entire system powers up. As the system powers up, it gains capacity. The mind goes through transformation under the stress of this transformational capacity. In other words, it changes its idea of itself. In pre-Shaktipat, we have an idea of ourselves. And then Shaktipat comes in other words, a higher spiritual law, by virtue of the agency of the Guru, brings in that force and begins to activate the architecture of the profound subtle body. That pathway of activation, that pathway of Shaktipat, is the Guru Margena, the pathway of the Guru. In other words, the tattva, the principle of the Guru, is manifest at the beginning of creation, is an aspect of the triunity of creation, salvation, and truth. And that Guru agency is active. The human form carries within it the Guru Margena, the Guru's path. The Guru Tattva is present not only as an idea, because all living beings are subject to grace. Everything. Whether it is sentient or insentient. But it's important to note the human form is a highly developed form in the Yoga Tantra lexicon. It is said to be a final form. In other words, it is a form complex enough to make the complete transformation out of unconsciousness into consciousness. Nothing more need be added to you. You have all of the hardware and software. It just needs to be switched on. And this is what Shaktipat does. Through the pathway of the Guru Margena, the Guru's path, the throb of Shaktipat pierces you individually and begins the process of switching on all of the circuitry of the subtle physical body. It will do so differently in each person, but it will use the pathway of each of the three forms. The Pinda, the pathway of the Kundalini Shakti, with all of its complex architecture, 3 rivers, 10 pranas, 6 wheels, 1,000-petal lotus, all of that. That's the pinda. The pada, the lotus feet, is the manifestation of conscious and unconsciousness, present as a single idea. That's why we say the guru sits at the crown of the head. Sounds poetic, but it's also instructive. That the structure of the triangle, the soham, the red and white, inside that void field, is at the crown of the head. Consciousness and unconsciousness are present within you, side by side at the crown of the head. It's the gateway between consciousness and unconsciousness. The higher circuitry of the universal Sahasrara, reaches up into universal consciousness. It's a dedicated circuit that is actually quite capable of contacting consciousness from an unconscious position. And in other words, you are unconscious, but there's a part of you that is unconsciously conscious. The idea of Shaktipat, what is between your conscious and your unconsciousness, are the stored information of all of this impressional data of the physical body, of the subtle physical body, of the causal body. And as the Shaktipat travels down the Guru Margena, it will capture the systems of the pinda, the kundalini. It will capture the systems of the pada. In other words, the Guru will install himself at the crown of your head and begin to make you conscious of your own higher nature, your own higher states. And what it'll also do is begin the process of purification, systematic elimination of the storehouse of impressions of the physical body, systematic elimination of the impressions of the subtle physical body. The impressions of the subtle physical body store along the 3 rivers, concentrated at the seats of the 6 wheels and the 5 elements. It looks like they look like billions of little drops of black tar resting on a brilliant fluctuating plasma field. As the kundalini begins to move in the left and right channel with the movement of the soham, with each descent and ascent, it strums the 5 qualities of the prana, the descending, the ascending, the cyclical revolution, the expanding and contracting, infusion. And with each one of those breaths, those throbs of consciousness, another set of impressions are removed. This is very analog. These are stored impressions of countless lives. And they are wiped away. This is why when you see a person, once they get Shaktipat, you'll watch them, when you first see them, they kind of look like a broken down house, you know. They're drafty, windows are broken out, tiles are broken, and first thing Shaktipat starts to do is it goes through and fixes all the drafts, puts all the windows back in, lights the fire in the hearth, and warmth begins to be stored inside the body, inside the subtle physical body. And you watch a person over the course of time, after Shaktipat occurs, they get brighter and brighter, healthier and healthier, shinier and shinier. They have more and more energy, because their energy is not leaking out. And this removal of these stored impressions is kind of like a fresh coat of paint, fumigating the fungus out of the basement, removing the mold in the walls, and one is transformed. What's incredible in the case of the Guru Shakti in the course of its lineage is this happens so fast. Without the Guru, quite literally thousands upon thousands of incarnations. With the Guru, a single incarnation or a handful of incarnations. The impressions are removed out of the physical body, out of the subtle physical body, out of the mind. And as this occurs, the content of what we call unconsciousness becomes thinner and thinner. As this occurs, intelligence becomes more refined, of a higher and higher capacity, and the capability of intuitive insight, the leap of insight into the nature of things increases. And this is what we call the idea of the plumbing of the depths of oneself, the unconsciousness. I mean, you would think that even once Shaktipat occurs, which is, what is it? But the direct expression of consciousness back to unconsciousness. You would think it would be instantaneous. From the standpoint of infinite time and creation, it is instantaneous. But remember, there is no one-to-one correlation between consciousness and unconsciousness. Once it becomes unconscious, it is subject to these laws. And so the consciousness must reverse engineer all of the stages of unconsciousness. And this is your spiritual life. This is sadhana. There are dynamics of skill, ability. You'll find with each year, once you achieve Shaktipat, you'll find your intelligence moving more swiftly, your insight more sure-footedly. And you'll begin to make more and more right decisions in a row without making a wrong decision. A wrong decision being one that generates more karma and produces difficulties for oneself. And in this way, the idea of reverse engineering unconsciousness back to consciousness takes place. And as this thinning down of the storehouse of karmic impressions occurs, one begins to understand. I mean, you first hear the concept of emptiness, and it just sounds like Greek. It means nothing. Happens to everybody. Never think that you're the only person that doesn't get it. But while as this reverse engineering of unconsciousness back to consciousness takes place, it thins down and capacity begins to emerge, ability. And this energy of vijnana, insight, begins to become a very, very powerful tool. And you begin to have glimpses into the nature of the truth. And you see it within yourself. The refinement of intelligence, the refinement of the left brain and its logic-based system of sound and meaning, and the right brain, where the capacity of intuitive insight is strongest. As they both become to rise and unify, you get the integration of the entire mental force. In general, as we were speaking last night, the capacity to understand emptiness is a kind of a right brain activity, more of a right brain activity. One of the aspects of Shaktipat is to switch on the right brain. But the point is that it is by virtue of this process that one gains the insight and the understanding of consciousness. You should understand, by all intent, the words emptiness and consciousness are interchangeable. Insight. And in this way you are given a tool to break the thrall of Maya. Plumb the depths of unconsciousness. Go through the entire cycle, and then you are poised by virtue of the grace of the Guru to reconnect with the bliss of the self, to reconnect with the bliss of the supreme consciousness. And this pathway is the bliss of samadhi. Samadhi is the pathway from unconsciousness back to consciousness in a jiva, in an individual soul. And thus we come back to the beginning. The bliss of the Guru is the bliss of samadhi, as it is the road, the gate, the bridge between the bound soul, the unconscious soul, and their true conscious self, their true conscious nature. In all cases, the Guru is that. The Guru is the bliss of samadhi. The Guru is the bliss of the self. The Guru is the bliss of supreme consciousness. They are not, the Guru is not that which leads to that, it is that itself. This idea of subject-object reverberates in the mind. The division of the whim of separation between consciousness and unconsciousness goes everywhere. And thus we have this subject-object relationship with everything. Examine this. It's a Maya. That same whim that separated at the beginning, from the standpoint of timeless time, it is present now. One could say what essentially happens in the dynamic of samadhi is that the separation, the idea of separation goes away. It's important to understand this idea of relationship of conscious to unconsciousness. One is eternally present. One is a system of laws. You oftentimes hear of bodhisattvas who have taken the vow to exist till the stars burn out. Being conscious of consciousness. Consciously. Existing in world system after world system. Bound in unconsciousness. Why do they do that? Well, if they didn't do that, where would the opposition arise? They're presenting the argument of unification. In the end, that's what the gurus do. Present present the argument of unity. When we sit together and go into samadhi together, presenting the argument of consciousness to unconsciousness. The gurus that come and serve. It's always a play of consciousness, and it's always a war. As much as you can, you should read the history of Dharma. Learn what happened to the personalities. Those that came, served, left, again and again. It's very interesting, it's very instructive. The essence of samadhi is the unified vision. You are forced to accept the interconnectedness of all things. This is the famous annihilation of the individual ego. You are simply presented with a view of reality that completely refutes the idea of individual identity. It's not so much as if it were destroyed in some violent way, it just simply stops working. It's not there anymore. Consciousness and unconsciousness. The Guru. Consciousness and unconsciousness, consciously manifested as one thing. Very good. Om Swaha.